this tutorial will be helpful for you to understand a little bit more about how JupyterLab works and how to write extensions for it. I'm gonna share my screen. Can everybody see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't think. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, let's go. So first, let me introduce you to your mentors. We're all contributors to the Jupyter ecosystem. I'm Carla. I'm a software developer at IBM, and I work in the same team as Alex and Martha. We're all part of the Code 8 organization, which stands for Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies. So today I'm gonna give you a quick overview of JupyterLab and its structure. Then Alex will talk about extensions and walk you through how to create a front-end one. And then Martha will guide you through creating a server extension. And we also have Max Klein from JP Morgan here today. He's also one of the JupyterLab core developers, and we'll talk about how you can debug JupyterLab. And here are all our contact information, so you can feel free to email us or find us on GitHub if you want to stay connected. So first of all, what is JupyterLab? So it started from the classic Jupyter notebook. It is an open source web interface that allows you to either edit and execute code that may also contain text and rendered visualizations, as we can see here. It is widely used in particular for easy workflow documentation for data science and machine learning, but not only that. So notebooks are more like documents. So it can contain text cells and code cells, where code cells are executed by built-in kernels. And for now, like today, we have support for over 50 programming languages. And this is how the classic notebook looks like. And then JupyterLab is the next generation UI for the project Jupyter. It has been designed as modular and also to be extensible. So it provides a more interactive environment and also has a modern implementation. For example, it uses NPM-based packaging, TypeScript, and widgets, for example. And it will eventually replace the classic Jupyter notebook as we know. And this is how JupyterLab looks like. So it has a file explorer here that now is also accessible in the same page as, for example, as an open notebook, and something that we couldn't see before in the classic Jupyter. You can open terminals, you can have tabbed workspaces, and you can rearrange the page as you wish. So you can see it's a lot more dynamic and user-friendly. Then on your browser, if you're interested, you can go to JupyterLab.org GitHub. So it's github.com/JupyterLab. And here you can see all the projects that are part of the JupyterLab organization, including JupyterLab itself and its core extensions. And the other ones are other JupyterLab extension repos that you can also access. For example, a debugger extension or the cookie cutter that we're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about this one a little bit more, where you can use it as a template to build your own extension, which is pretty cool. And then if you go to the JupyterLab GitHub repository itself, so it's github.com/JupyterLab/JupyterLab. This is where you can find JupyterLab source code. And then if you navigate through the directories, some of their names are self-explanatory, for example, docs and examples. But say you're interested in the backend code, you can find it in JupyterLab directory. This is where you find handlers, commands, debug, extension setup, and so on. You will be more familiar with these files once Martha guides you through server extensions. And then in packages directory is where you're going to find JupyterLab's core extensions. For example, the code editor and notebook itself, it's all going to be in packages. So all main components that make JupyterLab are written as extensions, which can be then even further extended, as Alex will explain next. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Alex now.
Awesome. Share my screen.
Just some comments. So as we're starting now with the more, with the more technical part of the tutorial, just feel free to use the button on your WebEx to raise your hand if you have any questions, or just use the chat and we'll answer your questions as we go.
And if I will probably miss those myself, since I will be seeing this presentation in front of me. So if other presenters can chime in if people have questions, and I don't seem to catch them. So again, my name's Alex. I work with Martha and Carla. I'm going to be walking us through JupyterLab extensions, specifically the front-end extensions, the ones written in TypeScript that are all generally run and built client side. That is browser side. So yeah, so getting started off on what are JupyterLab extensions. JupyterLab, as Carla said, is designed to be extendable. It's the idea that all of the core is also just a giant bundle of extensions. And so by doing this, you can use extensions to create new things like editors or like visualizing output. You can add new buttons or menu items to existing functionality within core. Or as Martha is going to show you later, you can provide APIs for other extensions and your own extensions to use that allow you to connect with the backend. Yeah. There we go. I have to click it apparently. So yeah, so why use JupyterLab extensions? The core extensions that come with JupyterLab are intentionally limited in scope. The core developers work very hard to not let JupyterLab bulk up. There has been many discussions in JupyterLab's developer meetings about whether or not certain very popular extensions should be adopted into core. Certain ones aren't. We'll be tackling an example extension in a little bit called Table of Contents. In the upcoming release, Table of Contents has actually been merged into core. Another example we'll be covering is Git. Git was discussed and decidedly decided that we shouldn't be putting Git in core because it is a good extension to leave outside of core and allow people to opt into by installing it themselves. And part of the reason behind this is every user needs different tools. Everybody needs a slightly different environment. And so this allows every, like the DevOps for every team or the users themselves to customize their environment of JupyterLab and not be shackled down by all this extra stuff that comes by default. So we're gonna get started into some actual workshop. So I pasted a link in the chat to this repo. If I think people can see it. If I can see this screen. Okay, so Yeah, so everybody that's here should come to this link I pasted in the chat earlier and check out this repo locally. This is the base from which we will be doing this tutorial. Everything you need to know is in this repo. So if everybody could take a chance to do that now, check it out locally where you want. All the demo work that we're going to be going through is in the demo folder. And all the slides for today's tutorial are in the slides folder for reference. So, and if you want to come back to this later, this repo does support Binder. And so you can do all of my portion of the presentation through a Binder instance. When we get to Martha's portion of the presentation, that portion and later will not be supported by your instance, which is why we will be doing everything locally on each of your machines. Okay, so back to the slides. We want to just start up JupyterLab and kind of show you around. I'm hoping that most of you have touched JupyterLab before, but we're assuming not all of you have. So just realized that I messed up and I forgot to have you guys install JupyterLab on this slide. So for those that don't already have JupyterLab installed, it's very easy to install. It's pip install JupyterLab. I'll just quickly go over here to the JupyterLab repo. And it's right here, pip install JupyterLab. Need to figure out a way to see how everybody's doing. So if anybody's having problems and needs feedback, feel free to type it in the chat. I can see the chat. I don't know if you guys can see my chat underneath my mouse here. But okay, so not much feedback from you guys. This, as I said, this presentation system is a little bit hard for you guys to give me feedback outside of the chat. So I'm going to kind of roll with the hope that you guys have managed to check out the tutorial repo and pip installed JupyterLab. And so our next step will be to actually run JupyterLab. And I'm going to show you guys just kind of getting started on actual.
Alex,
yeah.
I think there's a couple of people who actually do need more time based off of, I think they're in the Q&A.
Oh, they're typing in the Q&A and not the chat. Okay, how do I open up the Q&A instead of the chat?
Sorry, Elizabeth, what is the link you want? Or do you want the command to install JupyterLab?
The command to install JupyterLab is pip install JupyterLab. I would recommend locally in your browser, on top of opening up our repo for this talk, also opening up JupyterLab's repo that Carla mentioned earlier, JupyterLab/JupyterLab. It will allow you to reference the core code and the libraries that might be in it while you're working on extensions later in this tutorial. As you can see, those are the two tabs I have opened for today. And the information's in there.
Yeah, sorry, she was looking for the link to the repo.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to just open up the chat in the Q&A. Okay. By default, everybody, the Q&A is open. If you click the chat in the bottom right of your screen, that is a easier to use interface than the Q&A. Okay. While everybody's doing that, I'm going to start up my own JupyterLab. So I've already installed JupyterLab. Can't install it twice. So to run JupyterLab, you just Jupyter space lab, and you run it. Except it didn't like that. So I apparently have not actually run JupyterLab. I told my teammates to remind me this if I forgot. I would, for those of you who use Conda or any form of Python environments, I would suggest creating a new environment for today's tutorial. That is why I don't actually have it installed, is because I created a new environment and did not install it yet.
So
I'll be doing this all with you guys.
Jose had a question. What was the main driver to start with JupyterLab when data science had notebooks? Anyone wanna?
So like to replace the notebook UI with the JupyterLab UI? Is that the question?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yes, I can make the text a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that was the.
Let's see, what's the key for that? It's Command plus.
There
that a
are
little bit
bunch
better?
of bunch of drivers behind the decision to start a new UI with JupyterLab, but the big thing was what we're going over right now, which is extensions. There was no real extension system for the original notebooks. People have written a lot of extensions, but they're all essentially weird JavaScript hacks that don't necessarily work well with each other. So essentially, like for as part of my job professionally at JP Morgan, I run their own internal JupyterLab platform, and they have literally 50 extensions, and that's not something that would really be possible with the old notebook. So yeah, basically, if you want to come up with something extensible, JupyterLab is the way to go.
Okay. Awesome. It looks like people are good. I have you guys can't see them, but I do have the Q&A and the chat open in some windows here, so I can try to follow along with those questions. Okay, so I've installed JupyterLab now, and so as I said, JupyterLab, and this will boot up JupyterLab. Takes a 30 seconds-ish to start up a normal JupyterLab. There we go. And it just loads it right into your browser. It pops open to your browser. It remembers where you were last time in JupyterLab, so you'll see that I have some tabs open already, and and it was remembering where I was in the directory. It will start JupyterLab in the directory that you're in, so I made sure to start it within the directory that I had checked out our Git repo for this talk to. So moving along, if you go over here to this side tab with the little puzzle piece, this is a new-ish extension. It's left beta as part of 2.0, and you can enable it by clicking the enable button, and this will allow you to both search and see what you already have installed. So you can see I have nothing installed already, but I can actually search. So you actually already see it down here. But I can search for TOC. And there's the TOC, and you also see TOC extension. The TOC extension is the interior core extension for 3.0. I don't know why it's showing up in the search. I'm assuming it's because there is a beta of it out. We are going to be installing JupyterLab/TOC, and you can just click the install button, and you'll see it starts working up at the top. And it'll tell you that a build is required to update to the latest changes. So we can click rebuild, all from within JupyterLab, and it's going to start rebuilding in the background. And so we can go about our business and do other things while that's running in the background. And it will, when it's done, it will prompt us to refresh our browser, and it will pick up those changes. So it does take a minute. As you can see, when you close all your tabs, you get a launcher tab, which will allow you to create new notebooks, terminals, text files, etc. So see, there we go. Build complete. You click reload. Refresh the page. You'll see a new tab over here called table of contents. And if you open up something like a markdown file, you will see the table of contents on the side. That's an example of
another question.
Good. Yes. Let me pop these open. Oh, yes. The search view is this puzzle piece tab on the side. It lists all the extensions that are installed and allows you to discover new ones that are listed on NPM. This is specifically for installing already built extensions. So if users want to find your extension once you've published it, this is one way they could find your extension. I can get the Q&A out of my way again. Thank you. Okay, so let's skip back to the slides real quick. This was essentially what was on this slide. Nice and easy. It's pretty straightforward to install. You can also do this via command line, but I wanted to show you guys that first. So I've already walked through this, showing you how it can look. As you can see here, when you open up different things like a notebook or Python, it will show you table of contents. Each table of contents has its own unique implementation within that for notebooks, Python, and Markdown. So it looks slightly different to match the use case. So let's show you how to install a server extension. So as you can see down here, what we installed before was called a lab extension. These are front-end extensions, and as you saw, they can be installed and built all within the UI without having to restart JupyterLab itself. Server extensions are back-end extensions that are part of the actual server that started when you start JupyterLab and have to be installed via command line and require restarting JupyterLab in order to pick them up. So one such extension is called Git. So I'm going to show you here. If you search for Git, you'll see the JupyterLab Git extension. If you try to install it, it'll actually give you a warning. And it warns you that it has a server extension along with the front-end extension. Git has both. And it tells us in order to get the backend extensions, you actually want to install it using pip. So pip install JupyterLab-git. So I'll just copy that. We're going to come over here. We're going to stop the server with a double Control-C. We're just going to pip install JupyterLab-git. So this is one of the ways you can install backend, pip or npm, depending on where it's published. It was a quick install. I'm going to pop back over here. This matches what I was doing. But you'll notice that when you do an install, you also have to do a JupyterLab build to pick it up. So we're going to do JupyterLab build. So what JupyterLab build does is it takes already built extensions that you've built locally or installed locally, and it actually builds them into your instance of JupyterLab. So if you install a bunch of extensions locally using pip or npm and you don't do JupyterLab build, JupyterLab won't actually know that those are installed. It doesn't magically find packages unless you do a JupyterLab build to build them into your JupyterLab instance. So this, depending on how much you've added, this can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple minutes, usually on the shorter end. So, and just FYI for this section, if you guys can't follow along, that's okay. But if you guys can, that's great too. Just while it's installing, I'm checking the Q&A and the comments. So I see somebody's having trouble seeing the table of contents running. Okay, my build's done, so I'm going to run JupyterLab again. And so I can show you that. As a heads up, the extension tab that I've been showing you guys off to the side here, this extensions tab, was not there by default in JupyterLab 1.x. So if, for instance, if any of you have an instance of JupyterLab 1.x already installed in your environment, one, I would highly recommend creating a new environment using Conda or another Python environment manager and installing a later version of JupyterLab for this tutorial. Though I had originally wrote this tutorial, my section of the tutorial, when JupyterLab 1.x was out, it has been updated since then, and I do not know how much of it is backwards compatible with 1.x. In 1.x, you had to enable this tab inside the palette. I believe, not that one. Inside the palette, you can click this enable Extension Manager on and off to remove or add that tab. In 1.x, that was off by default. Okay, so as you can see, there's a new tab here with the Git logo. And you can see this great untracked file looks super funky. That's my slides that I have currently open because they are in there. But you can see all the Git history and all this is in there. And you can actually do and create changes to Git, commit things all through this interface without having to go to the command line. Again, Git is a fantastic option for an extension. So back to slides. Now we get started on creating our own extensions. So this is the real follow along. This section is going to end with us working on an exercise. So it's really important you guys follow along. This section has also been presented in the form of a binder demo that is included in the demo folder of the repo. So if you open up the repo that we ask you guys to all check out, I'm going to copy this into the chat again, just in case anybody showed up late. You'll want to check out this repo. But inside this repo, in the demo section, there's a README. This README is actually going to be all the steps one by one that I will be following for the next however long it takes us to get through this. So rather than checking out the slides, if you want to just follow along using this markdown README, it's probably quite a bit easier. I will be leveraging this for some copying and pasting. So also, quick heads up, I would suggest always closing your JupyterLab tabs whenever we have you and stop the JupyterLab server in order to not have it spaz out. Sometimes when you restart JupyterLab and you already have a tab open, the tab doesn't update or it causes the new instance to have problems because there's already a tab open. It's a bit of a race condition. So starting along with this, I'm going to be following along in the README here because it's easier. So first thing we want to do is we want to install Cookie Cutter, which is called pip install Cookie Cutter. That is not included in that markdown because the markdown was written with the assumption that you were running this demo through the binder, which our binder instance installs that for you. So everybody needs to do a pip install Cookie Cutter. Cookie Cutter is a really cool tool that allows you to template repos. So, and we'll be using Cookie Cutter in order to template a repo. Okay. Also, once you're in your tutorial repo, I would suggest changing into the demo directory while we're working on this, since that is where all of our example code is. You'll also note that in the demo directory, there's a directory called completed demo. If at any point what I'm saying is confusing you, or you need to see some code I wrote again, or we get to the exercise and you need help, this whole demo and tutorial with all the exercises completely complete and working is available in the completed demo, including all of our example code that we would suggest for the exercises. So you can always feel free to reference it. I would suggest not looking at it until you get stuck because it could spoil the fun of figuring out how to do certain things yourself. Okay. As you can see, I'm kind of filling a lot of time between these commands to give people time to make sure they don't get behind. If at any point you feel like you're getting too far behind, make sure to ping in chat or Q&A for me to slow down. I don't want to lose anybody. Okay. So now that we have Cookie Cutter installed, we can use the Cookie Cutter tool. So with Cookie Cutter, you just give it a parameter of a Cookie Cutter repo. In this case, JupyterLab has the extension Cookie Cutter in TypeScript that they already have available. And so I just do this here. I'm in the demo folder. That's my suggested place to do this. And we do this, and it's going to give me some prompts. For me, I've used the cookie cutter before. And so it's asking me, oh, do I want to re-download this? And I'm going to say yes, because the repo might have changed since last time. So we'll go with yes. It's going to ask me a name. A lot of this info that it's asking you to fill in is just going to fill out the package.json that would be eventually published to NPM. So you can fill this out with blanks or with your own information. I'm going to type in my own name. The extension name can be whatever you want. This is going to be the name of the folder that is going to be created, though. So I'm going to be calling this my button, because we are going to be creating a button in this example. And then ask for a description. I'm going to use the default. It's an extension. In the prompts, what's in the brackets is what it will default to if you don't type anything in. In this case, we do not yet have a server extension. Martha will be getting to that in a little bit. And we do not have a binder. And then it's going to ask you for a repository name. The idea is if this is supposed to be the name of the repository when you decide to publish this, I'm going to leave it as the default because I don't plan on publishing this particular button tutorial. Cool. So now it's been cookie cuttered. So the next step is I would suggest opening up this folder in a IDE. I will be using VS Code. You can use whatever IDE you feel most comfortable in, or just any editor that you usually use. I would suggest an IDE because then you can look at all the different areas. In this case, in the demo folder, I have the My Button folder. We'll all be using VS Code for this particular tutorial. I do know some of us on the mentor team also use other editors like PyCharm, or I believe Carla also sometimes uses Atom. So, but we've decided to use VS Code for this to make sure you guys have one unified look and feel while you're seeing our code. So as you can see, it created this new folder called My Button, and it populated it with a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to switch back to the slides real quick. Oh, just a sec. Are there any comments? No. Cool. So coming back to the slides. This is okay. We're into the markdown section now. Okay, so let's look at the package.json. I'm going to copy this right now so I don't have to come back to this screen. So we're going to paste this in a sec. We're going to copy these. These are some of the libraries that we're going to be using that are in JupyterLab core. So JupyterLab app utils, doc registry, and notebook are core extensions, and we'll be leveraging libraries in those core packages. Lumino is another package within the JupyterLab org that is consistent of widgets and utilities and other web development tools that JupyterLab leverages. So you'll see Lumino a lot when you're developing JupyterLab. The actual widget class that all JupyterLab widgets extend is a Lumino class. So let's come back over here. We're going to open up our package.json. So the package.json is everything that JupyterLab needs to know about building this extension, publishing this extension, etc. So this got pre-populated with like the name, the description. One of the keys here is you need to make sure JupyterLab and JupyterLab extension are in the keywords. Otherwise, your extension would never be found on that search tool that we were showing you earlier. Similarly, in order for an extension to be discovered by JupyterLab during the JupyterLab build phase, it needs to have this section down here at the bottom. So you also see here in dependencies, by default, it adds the application dependency. All extensions will need that. So we're going to add all those other extensions here. I'm just going to copy these in, fix the tabbing here. So now we have all of these. We're adding these because I'm going to be eventually needing these for imports in our TypeScript. So I'll just save that real quick. And again, as everybody's following along, if anything's confusing, feel free to ask questions. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the index.ts file. For anybody who's not aware of what TS is, TS stands for TypeScript. It is an extension of JavaScript with strong typing. So it allows you to write JavaScript in a more standard way. It allows people who have developed more like C and Java and Python to write JavaScript the way that most other programming languages are written, rather than like the scripting language JavaScript is. So by default, it creates this extension right here, which it will later export as the default. And in this extension, it adds an ID and an activate function. So what the activate function does is at the start of JupyterLab, this is what runs. This is your extension right here. So following the markdown, we're gonna import a button extension from the button class, which we will be grabbing in a sec. So we have this cool new button extension. We're going to copy this little snippet of code here and add it to the activate function. Again, this is all in the markdown for you guys to follow along. So what this is doing is this is creating a new class of this button extension that I've not yet shown you. And what it does is it goes into the document registry for JupyterLab, and it adds to the notebook widget. So the notebook widget is a widget that's already part of core. So what this is doing is the add widget extension is looking up the widget named notebook, and it is adding the button extension to it. So what is this button extension? So if you notice, I have this examples directory in demo. And in here is button.ts. You can just copy button.ts into source. There we go. We're just going to open button.ts real quick for you guys. So this is a piece of example code that I created in advance for you guys to use. Rather than trying to get you guys to write all these details out yourself and learn what they each mean, I created a widget for you guys. In this case, this widget is specifically a widget extension. So widget extensions allow you to add features to widgets that already exist rather than creating a whole new widget. As I mentioned earlier, widgets are kind of the basis of extensions. Most extensions have at least one to multiple widgets at their core. So in this case, we're creating a button extension, which is a widget extension. And the widget extension only needs you to implement one class, which is create new. That is, in this case, anytime that the widget that this is extending, in our case, notebook, is created, it's going to run this function. And so it's going to take notebook panel. Notebook panel is the class, is the widget class for notebook. And it's going to create a button. So toolbar button is part of JupyterLab. It allows you to create a button that's designed to be added to the notebook toolbar. And we give it a label and an on click. In this case, the on click is you did it. Just a nice little alert so we know it happens. Then inside of the notebook, we grab its toolbar and we insert a new item. So we're inserting our button, toolbar button here, giving it a name and a location on the toolbar. In this case, I gave it 10. If you don't have too many extensions installed, 10 is usually on the end. But if a lot of people have added buttons to the toolbar, it could end up in the middle. And then in this case, we return the button itself. In our case, this button is not being used, but it does need to return something of the iDisposable class, which toolbar is. Any questions so far? Again, this is all available in the repo. I hope everybody's following along and doing a good job. Hopefully. So now we want to build this. In order to build an extension, if you actually go to your extension code in that repo or in that folder that it created, there's actually a README that it automatically generated, and the README tells you all the build steps for building and installing. But it has all these little comment blocks in here. So we're going to come over to mine. So what we're going to do is JLPM. JLPM is a JupyterLab wrapper around NPM. So JLPM and NPM are essentially the same command. So we're going to do...
Alex, it's yarn, not NPM.
Sorry, yarn. It's a wrapper around yarn. My bad. Thanks for correcting me there, Max. It's a wrapper around yarn. So when you run it by itself, what it does is install the requirements. So that's our outside dependencies. And then we build. And then this is one of the keys. We're going to do JupyterLab extension install and then dot for the folder you're currently in. This will take the JupyterLab extension and register it with JupyterLab itself. So then when JupyterLab builds, it will know to build that extension. We're just going to do this. In this case, install actually runs build afterwards. You can do install with a no build flag. If, for instance, you want to install a bunch of extensions all at once, you can do a bunch of install commands with no build flags and then do one JupyterLab build at the end. But by default, this will run the build. So we're just going to copy all those into our terminal and just run them. And you can see, oh, I screwed up because I'm not in the right directory. I'm still in the demo directory. I want a CD to my button. Let's try that again. So why this is building, does anybody have any questions or is anybody struggling, not following along? This is my first time giving this to a non-audible or in-person group of people, so definitely weird talking to a empty room. Okay, we have a great question about whether or not rebuilding JupyterLab takes some time. Is there a faster way to proceed during development? So the development team actually agrees with that sentiment. And in JupyterLab 3.0, which is currently in RC and hopefully will be releasing within a week or two after JupyterCon is over, is completely revamping the build system for extensions. So a lot of the build build instruction parts of this tutorial will actually be out of date with JupyterLab 3.0. But they are updating the cookie cutter we are using to handle a lot of that for you. And as part of that system, they are streamlining that rebuild process. So you don't have to do this step every time. It will kind of do it for you on the fly. So similar to how we did that, how we were able to just like refresh our browser and it just picked up the new build that we were able to do through the browser. The idea is all of these steps would also be included in that. I am still myself getting up to date on how that new build system works. It is something I'm going to be working on the next week or two, getting my own team's extensions up to date with the new build system. But just know that that has been updated.
3.0 is the future, which is going to be great. Hopefully a lot of things will get easier. But for right now, what you can do to speed things up at least a little bit is instead of running JupyterLab, when you open things, you run JupyterLab space -- watch. So like,
yes,
the command QA. So that essentially speeds up the rebuild by a little bit. That'll get picked up when you rebuild your extension locally. That the JupyterLab that's running will then pick up the rebuilt extension automatically.
Yeah, so as Max said, there is the watch command, which is, I'll just show you guys. It's this, which then if I'm running JupyterLab Watch, I could open up another tab and I could run the JLPM build command, and JupyterLab would automatically do essentially the lab install in the background. It would see that this got rebuilt and pick it up, and all you have to do is refresh your browser. When we're doing our own development at IBM, we use Watch very regularly. I'm not using Watch for my section of this because Watch takes longer to start up each time you boot it because of the fact that it's designed to be left on. So let's start up JupyterLab now that we have that extension built. Okay, come over here to the file browser tab. And as you can see, because I was in our new My Button folder, it started up with just the folder. So again, when you run JupyterLab, it will start JupyterLab in whichever directory you are in. So as you can see, all of the code is available there. But now if I open a notebook, which I can't actually do because I don't have any notebooks here, but let's just do a new notebook. You'll be able to see, look at this, My Button, and we can click it. You did it. How's everybody's button? Did everybody get the you did it? I think there's a way for us to like vote in the sidebar. Let's see, how does that little voting thing? Is it under the participants tab? Yeah, it's under the participant tab. So if everybody can give a little bit of feedback in the participants tab, there's a little like speakerphone button you can click and give feedback. If everybody wants to like give some feedback on that to how everybody did they get their button to say you did it? Let's see. I can't seem to actually check the feedback. I'm not seeing, let's see. I got, let's see, here we go. Okay, so I got a too fast, I got a yes. There's a couple people that have asked some questions. Okay, here's a question. So it sounds like I am going a little bit too fast, so I'm gonna stew in this. This is a good point to pause because after this, I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of a wrap up, and then we're gonna move into our kind of workshop portion of this section. So we have a question. Is it also possible to retrieve an existing button from the panel and add some customization, like changing an icon and the like? I believe you. Yeah, I was about to say, I believe you can do that, but it's super hacky. You can definitely retrieve a button and like kind of learn about it and say, oh, what is this button's image? What does it do? So you can definitely get the button object, but editing it and changing its behavior, yeah, is not
So
a feature.
by design, the extent to which extensions can sort of interfere with each other is limited. So the way, the sort of real way that you would solve this problem is by replacing the extension that supplies the notebook toolbar, like the built-in extension that does that. The hacky way to do it would be something like what Alex is saying, using document query or something of the like to actually retrieve the actual objects in JavaScript, and at that point you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. I do know, I've never done this for the toolbar, but I do know in some instances you can do things where you find the widget or widget piece and you can remove it and then create your own and replace it. A good example of this is often people who do like suites of extensions. for JupyterLab will replace this icon in the corner with their own icon. So it indicates to people using the product that, oh, I'm using the super, like in my case, the super IBM customized version uses a different logo here. That's one example of taking something that exists and replacing it. I've never seen it in this toolbar. In general, in the toolbar, you would just add a new button or replace the toolbar as a whole, which is possible. And I do believe some extensions already do that. Oh, for those of you who are following along with this section directly in Binder, once you've done, you still need to do the build steps in the terminal. Once you've rebuilt, you do need to refresh your browser in order to pick up changes. In this case, refresh Binder. For if you are using this in Binder, you would need to do the commands for the terminal in a terminal here, rather than locally on your machine. I would not recommend doing this section in Binder for this tutorial today, because the next section that Martha's going to be doing, which is writing up a server extension, is going to leverage what you've already done here. And if you haven't done it locally, you won't have this code available for to build off of for the next step. Yeah. So I would suggest doing this locally and not on Binder if you do want to continue into the next section where we go about creating a server extension. I'm going to quickly go back here. I'm going to go back to my slides and see if there's anything in here. So yeah, at the end of the slides here, I do have some useful links for you guys to reference. Link to the cookie cutter, the JupyterLab docs, and a GitHub filter that allows you to just find extensions that are already on GitHub. Okay. So as I said, I would suggest not doing this in Binder, but for those who did do this in Binder, I'm going to give you guys an example. So when I'm doing this in Binder, I am in this directory. And I've built all this, I've gotten all this in the right place, and I come into this terminal and I run the commands, the JLPM build, and the JupyterLab install dot. And then once all of that's run here, then I just have to refresh my browser page and it should pick it up. And then at that point, you just need to open up the Python notebook again. As I said, this section this section of the tutorial was at one point adapted to a Binder instance, because everything that I've covered can actually be done within Binder. But you cannot build server extensions from within Binder. Well, you can write them, but you can't install them. So that's why we're having you guys do everything locally instead of on Binder, even though Binder is much easier. So, and for the most part, as developers, I would not suggest developing in JupyterLab. It's totally feasible and possible to develop all within JupyterLab, but it's definitely not suggestible. It's much better to use an IDE.
Most people who are in core or who do this professionally, most people use VS Code or one of the JetBrains IDEs.
Yeah.
Like PyCharm.
Yeah. Yeah, we as developers assume that our users will often be doing more data science oriented tasks from within JupyterLab, not traditional programming tasks. Any support we do for traditional programming is more of there for a utility. The idea of being able to open scripts like Python scripts or JavaScript files and quickly tweak or edit them in place, but not necessarily create like suites of software. So, oh, and I do see there's a notice that the button's in a different spot. The button is put into the 10th position. So if, for instance, you have previously installed JupyterLab with other extensions, it might not end up on the end here. One time I installed, I forget what it was. Oh, it was the Kite extension. Somebody recommended me to try it out, and I installed it, and it added a bunch of extra toolbar buttons here. And I did this demo, and I had forgotten to clean my environment. And the button just ended up like in the middle of all the stuff, and I kept like looking around for it. I was like, where is it? It's not on the end. Okay, let's see. Looking at, yes, so Max answered that one. How's everybody doing? How are people feeling? Is everybody kind of still working through to get to that button? Okay, so everything's building. Okay, so here's a little trick. So if you look at the code that came by default, you'll notice it had a console log in here. So in my case, I have a button here, but I'm going to show you how to. So if you open up your developer mode, hopefully you guys know how to do it. I have a quick key here for this. You go to the console, you'll actually see, among often other junk, JupyterLab extension, my button is activated. I would suggest double checking that this is printed in your console if you're not seeing the button. Because if it's not printed in the console, it means the button wasn't actually built into JupyterLab. That is that even though you might have built the extension code, JupyterLab didn't pick it up for one reason or another. So whenever I write extensions, I always leave this console log at the top of my activate function. If you install a lot of extensions, it can make your console pretty ugly. But I've just discovered it's just a solid way of always knowing which extensions have been installed very quickly from my browser. Cool. So I'm going to kind of, while everybody's kind of working through this still, I'm going to kind of outline what our workshop or our little exercise is going to be for this section. So you've already added a button here, but all the button currently does, you go into the button file, is do an alert. We want to make the button do something more than just alert the user. We're still probably going to leverage alert to show the information, but I have included, I'm in the wrong section. So I'm going to kill my JupyterLab real quick. And I'm going to start JupyterLab up from the root of the demo, the root of the tutorial repo. So I can see this. Okay. So I've included within the examples directory, which is going to be one up from the button, another file called parsing.ts. This is a utility class that is part of the Elira project, a project that Martha, Carla, and I work on at IBM. It's an open source suite of extensions for JupyterLab. Want to learn more about that? We have many talks next week here at JupyterCon, detailing what Elira is and such. But as part of that, we have this utility class called Notebook Parser, where it has a function called getEnvars, where you pass it a notebook string and it returns you an array of environmental variable names that are referenced in that notebook. In order to help you with the next part, I've given you this utility. So you can just take parsing and copy it into the source folder for reference. Just similar to how you did with the button, you just can copy it in. I'm going to go back over to my IDE to show you this. So we'll just go into examples. We're going to grab parsing. We're going to copy parsing and put it in source. So the idea is we want to be able to use this get mvars. I didn't want to force you guys to deal with this mess of a regex. So I made that easier for you. And so what I want you guys to do is inside of the button, I want you to create a new function that you can call from onClick that takes in this notebook panel and finds all the environmental variables that are in it. So what I would suggest is actually searching for notebook panel within JupyterLab. So again, I had you guys leave the JupyterLab repo open earlier. So you can just go and search for notebook panel. And you can find the notebook panel class. In this case, you see right here at the top, it says import notebook from panel. That means wherever notebook panel is, it's in the same directory as this widget factory here. So let's just go to this, go up, and find panel. In this case, it's in packages, notebook, source, panel. We can see notebook panel, so we know a little bit more about this. And so I want you guys to kind of take some time, you can read through this class, see all the different functions that are available on this class, and find a way to grab as the get mvars needs a string representation of the notebook itself, and then pass it to get mvars. And then you can, for instance, alert the return value. If you're struggling with this, this is completely implemented under the completed demo area. I would suggest trying it on your own first before reading the completed demo code, because as any good coder knows, once the code is written and you read it, it's really easy to understand. But figuring it out on your own is always a challenge. And yeah, so I want you, this is your exercise. Don't know how long we want to give you to try to work it out. But yeah, the goal is to get the mvars. And I am going to go over and install it so you guys can actually see what it looks like when it's done. I'm going to cd into demo, completed demo, and then I'm going to do the same thing as we did in our other one. I'm going to do the install steps to install this version of the button. Okay, let's see. Any new questions or chats? Sounds like everybody's just kind of chugging away at this. Or at least I hope that's why there's nothing in the chat.
Yep. There's a scheduled break in around 15 minutes, so maybe we'll just see where everyone's at that point.
Yeah, and we tried to time it so these workshop example exercise portions line up with the break. We're gonna have 2 of these, one right now and then one later on after Martha and Max's sections. Again, where you guys can take what we've kind of shown you that's already kind of been written out for you. Because as I showed, like I had you copy and paste all the code in. You guys didn't necessarily write any of that code yourself, and that's what this exercise is for, is to give you an opportunity to try figuring out and writing a little bit of code yourself. I gave you the library, so you didn't have to do that. So the real trick here is figuring out how to get that notebook string out of the panel by reading through that notebook panel class, and then figuring out how to update the onClick so you can actually show that in some way. Okay, so I've just done my install, and I'm going to start JupyterLab back up. Let this boot. And we are going to open up a notebook. So also, I've included in the notebooks folder an nvars example notebook that already has a bunch of environmental variable references already there for you. So it makes it a little bit easier for you guys to test this. So you'll see there's now a button called Find nvars. And I can click it. And it does bad things. That's odd. So I probably screwed something up with this, because it is showing me this. I think I know what's going on. Martha is leveraging this as part of her section, and it's probably leveraging a backend section. But the idea is I've updated it, and it's supposed to show the code. Let me just go into my code real quick. So for those that don't want to be spoiled on how this works, feel free to not look at the screen right now. I'm gonna go into the example code real quick and brainstorm. For those that kind of want to see my process on like how I might figure out how this breaks, you can feel free to follow along.
Yeah, you can just change the on-click button, the on-click
Yes.
function.
Yeah,
So-
there we go. Nice and easy. Just switch it over. Okay. And I just need to rebuild. So in this case, when you just do an update, oh, whoops. Right, I'm in the wrong folder. So in this case, when you do a code update, all you have to do is do JLPM build. In this case, it's complaining because
The on-click function that you've written requires an argument.
Yeah. It's supposed to be that.
I think it's actually panel.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. That's it.
There you go.
Let's try that again. Live development for everybody. Okay, and then once you build, then you can just run JupyterLab.
And
there we go.
there's a
This is what I
question.
wanted to show you guys. If you guys noticed, sorry, Martha, but if you guys noticed, I built my code, but I didn't do JupyterLab build. JupyterLab noticed that I had built my code, but did not rebuild JupyterLab, and it prompted me to rebuild. So now I can just tell it to build from here, and it will tell me when it's done to restart my browser. What were you saying, Martha?
There's a question from Elizabeth. I think, Elizabeth, you might not have used the cookie cutter. Is that correct?
Yes. The first step you need to take is the cookie cutter. I'll switch back over to the slides. So to start, you need to pip install cookie cutter, and then you need to run cookie cutter with this repo. And then this command here will actually create a new directory wherever you run it. And then that's where all of your extension code will exist. So in this case, when I ran this, I named my extension my button. And so the folder created was called my button. So as I mentioned earlier, the pip install cookie cutter is not part of that README because the README was originally written as part of to be used with Binder. And the Binder instance actually installs the cookie cutter as part of booting up Binder. Okay, so my build finishes, I reload. We go to over here, and we have find nvars. Look at that. I have it list off, found the nvars, and it lists all the environmental variables that it found. As you can see, it doesn't duplicate any of them. And so this is what I'm kind of trying to get you guys to get to with your exercise. Yeah. So we have our break in 10 minutes, but I am going to give you guys from now, I guess, through to the end of the break to work on this exercise. Does that sound good to the other presenters, or do we want to just start the break a little bit early?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Yeah, I think
I plan on being here to answer questions through the whole break. So I might pop my camera off for a second, but I'll be around still.
yeah, I think well, I'll be around to answer questions, but if someone
Question
wants to
from
take over,
Elizabeth. For has server extension, for now, just use the default, which I believe is N. I have not used the server extension portion of the cookie cutter before. I don't know how it works for the 2.x version. I've only used it for the 3.x beta. Martha will be talking about server extensions in the next section, though.
Yeah, for right now, just don't worry about it.
Yeah, I don't think that should be a big deal.
Yeah, I think even if you do say yes to that, I think what it does is create some Python files in another directory at most, which in theory you could just ignore when doing all of this. Okay, let's see. Oh, somebody's asking for the slides. These are the slides. The slides are in the slides directory inside the repo that we've been working out of. And everything that we've been doing code-wise is all in this repo. All the demo code is inside of demo, including the completed demo and the examples that I have you guys copy and paste. Yeah. And the example notebook is in there. And all of our slides, and our slides are numbered, and we do have both the PowerPoint and the PDF versions of them for reference. Yeah, and as I did mention earlier, you can launch this whole repo as Binder and do my section, the section we've covered so far, all within Binder for future reference. So if at any point you want to share this and say, hey, the first section is super useful, just try the Binder. You can launch Binder using this link here and then follow the README inside of demo for this first section at least. As I said, this first section I've customized and adapted and given this presentation 2 or 3 times now, including one time it was considered a poster at a conference. And yes, I agree about the Binder comments. You don't necessarily learn as much as a developer by leveraging Binder. I do definitely suggest using VS Code and doing all of this locally. You will gain a lot more from this tutorial by not trying to do things through a web interface.
Yep, Binder is great for doing demos and sharing working examples of extensions.
Mm-hmm. Is there a screen that anybody wants me to like leave my shared screen on, or? Yes, the dependency hell where nothing seems to build your dependencies properly. As a heads up to anybody who's struggling with that, my first check is always make sure the commas are in the correct place inside your package.json. The amount of times my builds fail because I screwed up on forgetting a comma somewhere in here. or a misquoted question mark, or I mean a quotation mark.
Well, VS Code should scream at you if there's a comma misplaced. It'll have like a red underline under the,
Yeah, let's see.
that section.
Oh, that's a,
like add a comma. If you add a comma like right where you
Yeah.
were a second ago. Yeah.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's
VS
one of the
Code is pretty-
advantages of using like an IDE like VS Code.
Mhm.
It might catch things before the compiler and like save you some time.
Yeah. So, and when we get to the debugging portion later in Max's section, it will be super important to have an IDE and not just like a random editor or trying to do it through a browser.
Well, you can also debug through your browser if you. Sometimes
Yes.
it's easier to set up. I might go over that as well.
So as I mentioned, is there a place you guys want me to like leave this screen on to help you guys? Or I can just turn off it and you can look at all our faces while you're working. Oh, here, more questions. The Q&A does not automatically scroll. The index.ts. Yes, I can show the index.ts again. This is the index.ts once everything is done. It's a little bit weird that the Q&A section in WebEx does not scroll when people add new Q&A. Oh, I believe somebody's answering this in text, but there was a question about the onClick this.make server request in the completed demo. The completed demo actually also includes Martha's next section. You would want to change that to you would want to change make server request to being onClick and giving it panel.
Yeah, and the reason you would do something like that is because onClick on its own, for most buttons, doesn't actually allow you to pass a parameter. So we're using this, what's called an anonymous function, to allow you to like pass a parameter to that onClick function.
Yeah. So the actual onClick function is this, which is given nothing, run this. So we're not actually passing it to this function. We're passing it a function that runs this function. So we do have two separate functions in here. This function will be covered later during Martha's section. This onClick function up here is my example for the exercise. So I'm going to take that off and move it back to index, though. Not spoil anybody's brainstorming if people are still wanting to try to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, if anyone wants a waste an afternoon on interesting computer science topics, the kind of thing with the onClick is called a closure. It's actually part of a much broader suite of techniques, but you don't really have to actually know anything about that.
Yeah, I've been developing inside of the JupyterLab umbrella for a year and a half now, almost a year. Yeah, over a year and a half now. And I'm still learning new little JavaScript quirks on like a weekly basis. JavaScript is a very interesting language, and TypeScript, for the most part, doesn't stop you from using any of the quirks of JavaScript. Just really puts you in a framework so you don't take advantage of loopholes that you shouldn't. Because there are a lot of loopholes in JavaScript. If you noticed a lot of the stuff Max I have said where you're like, oh yeah, you can't do that or you shouldn't do that, you'll notice we don't just say, oh yeah, that's not possible, because in a lot of the cases, anything is possible. If you write your JavaScript in just the right way, you can do almost anything with the code. It's just not always very clean, secure, or smart. Let's see, any new? Nope. Okay, so we'll be around. It is 8:30 now. We have a half-hour break scheduled. For those that want to work through the break and keep trying at the exercise, at least one or all of us will be here to answer questions throughout the next half hour. But for those that need to get up, move around, go take a break, grab something to eat, use the restroom, you guys have the next half hour to yourselves.
Hello. Okay, so just waiting a couple more minutes so everybody can come back on the break.
But while I'm coming back, I do see a question from Elizabeth in the Q&A that I can answer real quick. It looks like you have JupyterLab 1.x installed. And I mentioned earlier that this tutorial was designed around having JupyterLab 2.x. I would assume you probably already had JupyterLab installed for work-related reasons and your work has 1.x installed. So you can do one of two things. You can either update the package.json files to pull a 1.x branch instead of 2 for the various packages, or what I would actually suggest, which is to set up a new environment and to do a pip install JupyterLab with the latest version would be the easier way of handling it. Hopefully that answers your questions, Elizabeth.
Are we all ready to continue from here?
Well, I'm ready, whatever, but I don't know if there's a way of people indicating that they're back from the break.
Here, how about this? For those who haven't tried this already, that you can click raise hand in the participants menu. Or actually, even better, there's the feedback button in the participants menu where you can say yes, no, too fast, too slow. If everybody that's back could change theirs to yes in the
Yeah, and the
feedback menu.
is a
Okay.
little speaker. Oh, I don't like a
Yeah.
megaphone.
Because
Yeah.
because then we can see the feedback results and we can see how many people are back of the
Cool. Yeah.
15 that are
that's-
currently listed.
I see a few yeses,
Yeah,
but
it's a little check
Yeah.
mark.
We got four yeses out of the 15.
okay. I guess
So
people
I see a hand
coming back.
from Chris Kobe.
I'd say let's give it another minute or two and see if we can get at least half.
Yeah.
See another hand.
Yeah, hands or checks or some sort of
Yeah,
feedback.
so just, yeah, make sure you're here.
Oh, interesting. WebEx has a, I don't know what determines this, but they have a is not paying attention marker on people. I assume it's when it's when they haven't interacted with their WebEx. Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed during your exercise section, it was like almost everyone was listed as not paying attention, but I think it was because they were in their IDE working.
Ah, that makes sense. That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I say give it one more minute and then start at 5 after.
Sounds good.
I'm back.
Oh, good.
Hello. Okay, I guess we can get started. I'm gonna be sharing my screen again. So we're on the second set of slides. If you are pulling the slides from the GitHub repo, yeah. Okay. So thank you, Alex, for the workshop and introducing us to how to create extensions in JupyterLab. And now we're gonna start the next part of the tutorial and talk about server extensions. Yeah, so first of all, what are server extensions? So unlike front-end extensions that are written in TypeScript, as we saw, server extensions are written in Python, where you can add some server-side functionalities. So a server extension is actually a module that extends the server REST API. And JupyterLab uses the notebook server, which can be interacted with using a well-defined RESTful API, like something like this. For example, for every endpoint that we have here, API/contents, API/sessions, kernels. So for every endpoint, we have these handlers. So you can define custom ones in addition to the ones provided. So to define a custom handler, you can first write a notebook server extension, and then in the extension, you can register a custom handler for that. So for example, here for kernels, if you do a GET request to API/kernels, you will list the JSON data for all kernels currently running. And then if you do a post request for that, you can start a kernel and return the UID. So you can define your own using server extensions. Server extensions can also provide a backend for an extension. We're gonna see that soon with Martha. She's gonna go through how you can add some server-side processing to the button extension we just implemented. And here is the documentation, a link to it. So yeah, it has information about how you can author a basic server extension, adding extension endpoints, making it discoverable, like everything you need to know is here, including the extension app, which is not part of our scope for this tutorial, but it has all the information about it. It's just a base class for the Jupyter server, and all the information you need is here. Also, this documentation is already updated with the server in lab version 3.0. But for this tutorial, we're using 2.0, I guess, 2.x. And also there are some examples where you can see some other examples of how it's implemented. So this first link is actually, if you go to documentations, the documentation is, oh, where did it? Yeah, I think so this link here, examples folder, is the same link. So you can just navigate there. It goes to the Jupyter server repository, and it has a few examples here of server extension you can look at. It is very well documented, so you can go through how to install and use each one of them. You can look at their code and so on. And also, we just put here another example using a JupyterLab extension. So if you go to JupyterLab/JupyterLab latex, you can see, so this is an extension for editing your latex documents. This is how it looks like. And it's just an example, like you can go through the code as well. So where you can see that it has a front-end extension to integrate with the text editor, and it also has a back-end server extension component that actually runs the commands to produce the outputs that are displayed for you here. Yeah, I think, yeah, this is where JupyterLab LaTeX, usually the name of the application is where you can find the server files. And now I'm going to pass it on to Martha. She will show you how server extension works in more detail. Are you ready?
Thanks, Bella. All right. So I wanted to start off by just showing what the end result of what we're going to be working on for this part is, because I think it can be kind of abstract, like how do you access these APIs? So we're just going to make it so that you can go to my button /hello, and it will return a response of hello world. And just one kind of aside to this is that usually there's something called a token that is used for authentication. So when you open up JupyterLab, it'll give you this URL with a long token. And I don't have to use that for this because it's already a cookie in my browser, but normally you'll want more authentication when you're doing this. This is just a very basic handler. All right, so now I'm just gonna talk about the files that we're adding to do that kind of thing. It's really just 3 files. The first one is called setup.py, and that's used by Python's package manager, pip, to install a package. It includes super basic information like the name of your package, but also it could include information like the URL your API can be accessed by. And in this case, we're going to be adding some information that JupyterLab looks for to see if this is a JupyterLab server extension. And then the other files are in a directory. As Carla said, usually the Python source code for a server extension is all going to be in a directory that's named after your extension. And then in there we have an init.py. So the Python developers will be familiar with this. It just is initialization code. It sets up the package. It's going to be kind of the access point for JupyterLab as well. So JupyterLab is going to look for a couple of methods that give it information and kind of export the handler code so that JupyterLab knows what to run. And then finally, we have the handlers.py, and that's where I put the code that creates the class that we're going to be making that actually like handles the request. So when we submit that GET request from the browser to that API, we are going to be running code that's written in handlers.py. So in the actual details of the code, if you want, I put all of these files in the demo/examples directory of the repository. So that, I mean, a lot of this is configuration stuff. For JupyterLab 3.0, it'll all be part of the cookie cutter, but for 2.0, it isn't yet. So feel free to just copy it into your project. Just make sure that the files are in the right place. So setup.py is going to be in the like root or home of your project, your extension directory. Yeah, so you'll see it's using this package setup tools. That's just something that is used with pip, and as I said, it gives the name of the package, and then there's 2 other parameters, include package data and data files. And this is just giving some information to JupyterLab to identify this as a server extension. now to look at the init.py. As I said, there's a couple of things that JupyterLab looks for in this file. It's two methods, and you have to have these be named exactly this this name. So there's Jupyter server extension points, and that is, again, identifying this as a server extension and giving it the name. And then we have load Jupyter server extension, and this one has a parameter server app, and that allows you to access the instance of the server app that we're trying to register your handlers into. So you have to make a handler object and then hand it in to the server app.web app. And so you just have to know all of this to add it in. And this is just configuring it. You probably wouldn't really touch this after creating your handlers. The handlers object that I'm passing into this function is going to be an array in case you have multiple handlers. And this one just happens to only have one item in the array because we only have one handler. And the item itself is a tuple that the first item in the tuple is a string that is the endpoint. And we saw that that was what I typed into my browser. And then the second item in the tuple is the class that I'm defining in the next file that we're looking at. So you can see that I'm importing it from handlers.py. So in handlers.py, we're extending this Jupyter handler class, and that gives us the ability to feed this into the JupyterLab as a handler. And it has some other functions that we can take advantage of and use. And then we're also using Tornado, which will give us the authentication that I was talking about. And so in the actual class, we're just defining one method. It's get, and you'll see that there's a wrapper around it. You want to use this exact wrapper around every single function, every single method that you define. So if I'm making a post request in this same class, I'll also want to use this wrapper on that. And within that function, it's very simple. It's just using self.write that writes the response. And then I'm just giving it hello world, a plain string. So I want to take this time, that's all of the code. If everyone could actually try and install it and try out doing what I did at the beginning, that would be great. And then we can move on to Max's section is going to be about debugging, and then we're going to have a final exercise at the end. Has anyone had any questions? I hope that I wasn't going too fast or anything.
I think we're good.
Cool.
Just in case it was unclear to everybody, the files that she was referencing in this were all located in the examples directory of the repo where you guys grabbed the sample code that I gave you, the button and the parsing.
Yeah, so don't worry about it if you couldn't like type all of that out or copy and paste it. Just go ahead and you can find those files, those 3 files in the examples directory. Oh, and I wanted to explain the different steps of installing this. So you probably already have Jupyter, or you almost definitely already have JupyterLab installed from the first part. But for the server extension, you'll need JupyterLab and then also Jupyter Server, because we're using that package for a few of the different files. And then we have pip install -e period. Make sure you remember the period. That will call the setup.py that we were talking about and install that Python source code on your machine. And then we have Jupyter server extension enable my button, or if you changed the name, it would be whatever your extension name is. And that's going to add this into the Jupyter configuration. of server extensions. And also, if anyone's running into issues at that step, because I know that if there's an error, it doesn't necessarily give you an error at that step. Try just running JupyterLab with this command and with the debug flag, because it'll give you a really thorough, like the entire error, so that you don't miss anything. It's a lot easier to debug whatever's going on. So for example, if you forgot to install Jupyter Server, you might have an issue at this step, the server extension enable step. But you won't see what the issue is until you run JupyterLab. So, and then it'll tell you it doesn't have an installed Jupyter Server package on your machine. And then from there, just run JupyterLab like you did in Alex's part and go to the URL. Yeah, I'm not able to access. Oh, cool. Peter said it worked. I'm not able to access the Q&A, so if anyone, any of the presenters see something in the Q&A, make sure to speak up.
So far, so good.
I'm sure everyone's just kind of trying to go through the commands. But
Yeah, I'll give you some minutes to try all the steps.
I did just notice a small bug with the link on the slides. If you actually try to click the link on the slides, it uses tutorial instead of my button in the URL.
Oh,
So just
okay.
a heads up to people who actually try to click the hyperlink.
I changed the name, but I didn't think of changing the link there.
Maybe we can use the feedback tool again. So we get a head count on whoever was able to reproduce it, or maybe like just if you already gave feedback before, maybe just clean. Sorry, Marta, you're on mute. Just noticed you were trying to.
Oh my god, that's so funny. Yeah, no, I was just sorry. I was just noticing that a lot of people already had feedback from last time. So
Yeah.
maybe we should ask everyone to do a different feedback this time. For example, maybe the smiley face or the applause.
Oh, there's no way to clean your feedback.
Yeah, I don't see a way of clearing everyone's feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a clear button, but we can't seem to use it.
Oh.
Oh no. Okay, well, yeah, everyone do the smiley face if you have it working.
Good.
And feel free to use the no if it's not working.
Oh yeah, totally. Or just, yeah, send something to the Q&A or the chat. Oh, okay, yeah. I just noticed that Mark gave the too fast, slow down feedback. Do you need help? You could send something to the chat about sort of where you are. We could try and give you some more information. Sorry, I can't see the Q&A. Did Mark say anything there? Any other presenters?
He said he's catching up.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I think it's another hour until the end, right?
Ah, silence. The sound of many developers working hard.
Also, so there'll be, after Max's section, we're going to do an exercise where we bring together the server extension and the lab extension code. Maybe we should go ahead with the debugging section, and then if people have questions, they can ask for either the exercise or this setup part during the exercise portion. How does that sound to people?
There is a question in the Q&A. Mark is having an error loading server extension my button. Oh, it did work. Okay, never mind.
Oh, okay, cool. That's good.
Yay.
One more person with it working. So, Max, what do you think? Do you want to give people more time to set this up or just start presenting?
Either way, because I'm going to work off of the complete example in any case.
Oh, okay. I think let's just go for it. Here, I'll make you a presenter.
Okay. I'll share my screen. All right. Okay, so my part of this is teaching you all how to use VS Code to basically to handle any problems you might run into during extension development, how to set breakpoints in your code. Okay. So, so the first thing is, when should you try and apply these debugging techniques? And so it's essentially when stuff goes wrong. It's maybe the main thing, or just when you want to see what's going on in your code while it's running. How do you know when stuff goes wrong? So, for example, if you tried to add the button from this example tutorial or this example extension that we've been working on, and it doesn't show up. Alternatively, if you start seeing any errors in the Python console or in your browser console, some examples of just what that looks like. So if you were to go to DevTools in your browser, over Tools, what shows up in this Python console, if you see any errors here, that would be indication that something has gone wrong. Or if you see any errors that show up in the Python log of your notebook server, which will look something like this. And as you can see, I actually have a whole bunch of warnings. These aren't actually errors, but these have to do with that token stuff that Martha was talking about a minute ago. Okay, so how do you set up for debugging? So it's pretty straightforward at this point, and I do have to warn that some of this stuff is still experimental, so you all are kind of my guinea pigs for this. But the basic setup is pretty straightforward. So all you need to do is in a terminal that's pointing to the root of your project, which in this case is our extension development tutorial. You just do cookie cutter, gh, and then the address of this debug cookie cutter that I have set up. debug config cookie cutter. And then F, basically this will overwrite any existing VS Code config you might have. Sort of a condition of using this stuff is that it now owns your VS Code config folder. So you'll have to answer a few basic questions. So in this case, the name of the project is my button. For most users, has end file will be no, so you can just hit enter. For me, because I'm using virtual environment to do this development stuff, I have to enter yes, and then virtual environment roots. And then this one's a little tricky. So the only browser that the VS Code debug stuff works with is Chrome. I don't actually have Google Chrome for various reasons. What I have instead is the open source Chromium. So you need the full path, the actual bin for your Chromium. So on Mac, the way you figure that out is so you go to your application store and then Chromium, whatever. Then the actual bin will have a path, something like this. For most users, if you just have Google Chrome installed, you don't actually need to enter anything to this. You just leave it blank. And then for this one, just hit enter. And then so this will have created this VS Code folder in your project with these files. And so you'll have to most likely set up some of this stuff manually. Basically, it just depends on the exactly how your particular exactly how your particular project and how your particular development environment is set up. Some of the stuff will need customization. So in this case, the one thing that will need customization is this web root property. We need it to point to where the main package.json folder or file is for this project, which in this case is demo/completed demo package.json. So what you can do is you can just copy the relative path here. Then you can just add that to the end there. And so what this will have all done is to set up these debug configs in VS Code. So you can see them all in this run side panel in VS Code. And so there'll be a backend job that will run the Python server. There's a front-end job that will run the actual JupyterLab in a browser. And then there's a all job which will run them both together. So you can actually set breakpoints in both of them. And so the way you actually set a breakpoint is you just go to the code, which in our case is your demo, completed demo. So the Python code, for example, is like handlers. You can set a breakpoint there in the middle of the handler. Or for the button, we'll set a breakpoint here in this make server request function. And so once those are made, you can do is just run this all job. And that will start up the browser, start up JupyterLab, as you can see in this little. And so this will take a minute. Basically, just VS Code needs a minute to figure out how to attach to the TypeScript code that's running in the front end. Takes maybe like 30 seconds. There we go. Okay, so now when I click on our button that our extension added, what will happen is first we'll hit this breakpoint and make server request, and then you can inspect what's going on at this moment in the code. See the whole call stack, which is called. You can inspect the local variables. We can continue to go on to the next breakpoint, which is in the Python code, which is in this web handler. You can actually debug both the TypeScript side and the Python side in one go. That is the basic idea. So if anything goes wrong, essentially what you do is you try and figure out, you basically just start off by guessing where in your code you're having problems. And then you can set breakpoints, and the code will stop when it gets to the breakpoint, and then you can, by just inspecting what's going on with like the local variables and other stuff, you can figure out what the actual problem is. And that is the basic technique. There's some more instructions in the slides for how you can configure this stuff for your own project. So for example, there's just some stuff that you need to make sure is in the tsconfig for your project and in the package JSON. And that is about all the details. So yeah, I guess if some of the other presenters want to maybe go through and try this and let me know if it works for them too. Because like I said, some of this stuff is a little bit experimental, so it'll be interesting to see if this works for everyone. That is the basic idea. Right, end presentation. Okay, and I guess back to you, Martha.
Cool. Thanks, Max. All right, so we're just going to finish stuff off with an exercise again. And the goal is to change the lab extension code to call the endpoint that we just defined in the server extension code. So we want to just change that alert in the on-click button to instead display the text from your handler URL. And I think, yeah, as Alex said, it would be great if everyone would try this on their own. And I made sure to include a few links that would kind of guide you through. And there's an example of a different server extension being used within the JupyterLab code. But if you're really stuck, well, if you're stuck, you can always ask questions. You can also, this final product is in the Git repository in the same directory, the completed demo. But basically, quick guide to these links. Server extension is used to make requests from within lab extensions. Then response is a type that exists in TypeScript. It's a response from a request that you're making. And the reason you'll maybe want that is because you're returning, the server extension request returns a response to you, and that has a lot of different fields. If you try and just add that as an alert, it will just say this is an object. And finally, yeah, the example of server connection being used. This, I think, is good to look at because a lot of development can be looking at examples of how other people use things. If you're confused, it can be super helpful to just look at how something that you know how to use that's similar in JupyterLab was actually implemented in their code, because it's all there in the JupyterLab repository. Yeah, and like if you see a class that you in the examples that you don't quite understand, definitely look it up on the documentation, look through the API, and you might discover that there's a really easy way of doing this in TypeScript. These are just tips from me developing all the time. Yeah, so with that, if everyone wants to give that a try, or if they didn't get the server extension working, you can keep working on that and then get started on this. If anyone wants me to like elaborate more on what this exercise, what you're supposed to be doing, just ask in the Q&A or the chat. Max, I don't know if you're trying to talk, but you're muted.
Just talking to myself, actually.
Oh, okay, cool.
And Martha, I don't know if you mentioned, but do we have the completed exercise in a repo as well, just in case they want to refer to it later on?
Yeah,
For this portion?
yeah, I did mention that, but it's in demo/completed demo. I could even maybe add a link to it in the chat. But I might have to stop sharing.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, good idea. And for this part, I mean, for the feedback, since everyone changed away from the yes feedback, we can use the yes this time, maybe. So go ahead and use the yes feedback if you are all done with this exercise. Just another thing, in case anyone didn't know, this was the last item on our agenda. So we'll just be finishing up after this.
Martha, do we want to do maybe 5 more minutes and then go through the solution for this exercise? She's on mute. Or maybe she stepped away. But I think that was the plan. We wait 5 more minutes. See if anyone has questions.
Max has been super on top of answering Q&A questions so far. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Max.
Thanks, Max.
My section was short, so I figured I'd contribute.
So since we're coming pretty close to the end of the time, we were thinking that maybe, well, anyone can message the chat if they have any opinions about this, but we could explain the solution, and then, if people want to keep working on it on their own time, they can as well. Also, feel free to message me on Gitter, and join the JupyterLab Gitter, because they do answer questions to extension developers there. I can add a link to that in the chat, but yeah, just feel free to reach out to me whenever you want on Gitter about any issues you're having with developing. And yeah, so unless anyone has any objections, which you can just send into the chat, I might explain the solution to this exercise. All right. Am I still the presenter? Yeah. So here I am in button.ts. That's the TypeScript code that Alex was showing you that creates the button and adds an on click to the button. And all we have to do is, so we make this new function, make server request, and add it in the place of the old on click button. Because it's like a function that's within a class, you have to use this .make server request. And then one thing that might not be super clear to new TypeScript users is async and await, and that's for asynchronous calls. So we're making a call to a server. We're not sure when this call is going to return. So that's just the terminology that you use for the TypeScript compiler. It will wait for that this request to send back a response, and then set this variable to the value that it sends back. Another thing that's kind of related is promises, and that's kind of a similar thing. It's when you don't know when something's going to return. So the response, and you'll see this in the documentation for the response class. If you try and retrieve the text, it sends you a promise of the text, not the actual text. So you have to use this await to actually wait for that text to arrive, basically. And because we're using await in these two lines, we have to set the entire method to be async so that it knows that there are asynchronous calls in the function. This might not come up if you're making a non-server sort of extension, but it could. And okay, so there's also this line where I'm making the settings, and that's in case you have more specific. See, this is like, again, a very basic hello world request, but for more specific requests you might have, or different servers, you might have different things, like the authentication could be part of the settings, or different initialization things for the request. You can see more about that in the documentation. And then the actual request, as I said, it's asynchronous. You just use make request. And then here we're joining the base URL, which is part of this settings. The settings, when they're generated, automatically add the right base URL. And then we're using this package that just helps you join URLs, or do things with URLs, but in this case, join them, joining the endpoint that you added with that base URL, which, like in the case that I was showing right at the beginning of my presentation, it was localhost port 8888. And there's two more parameters for this make request call. The first is another kind of, it's the parameter name is init, and in this case we just have to include the method, which is get. As we saw, this could be like post if you're making a post request, stuff like that. And then these basic settings that we created up here. And then, yeah, from there it's just making the alert and doing that call to the text that I was talking about, where it's a promise. And if you were doing a different request, you might not be using the text function. You might be using .json if it was sending back JSON as a response, or there's more about it in the documentation. It has a whole list of the different ways that you can access the actual body of the request, as well as usually for to make sure that it doesn't have an error, we'll include an if statement that checks the status of the response as well. So if it's not a 200 response, which means it's a success, you might want to display an error instead of proceeding with your code. But that's all in the documentation that I linked to. And that's about it with this code. If you want, I can run it. I don't know if I have it built. But we'll see. Yep, there it is. It says hello world. And for servers, so there was we were talking about watch, and for the actual server code, so watch would be great for writing this example. I used it when I was writing this example. But for the Python code, you actually only have to restart JupyterLab. So here in handlays.py, I'm going to say, I'm going to add a bunch of exclamation points to hello world and restart JupyterLab. And now it's showing the exclamation points. So that's just another development tip for server extensions. You don't have to, there's no like, there might be a watch mode, but it's a lot easier to just rebuild.
This is an ongoing issue. There's no simple watch mode for the server extension like there is for the lab extension.
Yeah, but it's a little easier. You don't have to rebuild lab. So
yeah,
just so you know,
you just have to restart the server.
Yeah. But that's about it. Does anyone have any questions? Well, if not, maybe we'll just, I think we can just stay for the next 15 minutes on the call in case anyone has any questions in the remainder. And then, as I said, feel free to reach out up over Gitter if you have any questions in the future.
I did want to tack on something. There was a, I'm going to call it an advanced example or work exercise that we had considered giving you guys and decided kind of at the last minute it was probably too complicated to get done during this, which is continuing my front end exercise into the back end exercise. So on my front end exercise, I had you guys all grab all those environmental variable names. And so what we were going to ask you guys to do is put a post request to the back end that sends all those environmental variable names to the back end, have the back end look up all those environmental variables and send back their values to be displayed by the front end. It is a good, more advanced exercise than this based on this current code. And I just pushed an update to the completed demo section on the repo that includes an implementation of it if you are interested in what that looks like or trying it yourselves and comparing notes. So it's definitely beyond what we can do in like 10 minutes, but I did want to share that I did push that just now for those that are interested in that more advanced example.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Alex.
So it's been pretty radio silence from a lot of you guys throughout the tutorial, which is totally cool. But I personally am wondering how have people felt about the tutorial? How was it useful? Was it interesting? Just some feedback. If people want to give some feedback in the chat, I'd be very intrigued to see because this is something that we will most likely do again at some future time. So any feedback to us on anything is super helpful. Thanks, Peter, for the feedback. Yes, list of dependencies ahead of time. I believe we noticed probably like last night that we had not put those into slides in advance. As I mentioned a few times throughout this, large sections of this talk/tutorial were adapted from various previous sources, including my section, which was adapted from 2 previous sources, one of which had a prior section that had all the dependencies previously installed. And when I was adapting that, I did forget to move that section over. So yes, we should have had slides for you, or at least a slide for you saying, hey, get this set up in advance. That's good feedback. Thank you. Other feedback, suggested documentation or online resources to continue learning. Let's see. Max might have some feedback into this too. Other sources. I want to say did we leave any links in our slides? I think I might have removed some of the links out of the slides because there was so much old stuff in there.
Max in the chat just linked to the extension developer documentation, which is, yeah, I use that. It's pretty useful for extension developing. I think also just keeping in mind that all of the JupyterLab components are also extensions, and like using that as a resource. So just like the JupyterLab repo can be really useful. Yeah, I linked in my presentation to the server documentation. I think Carla was showing it a little bit. That's pretty useful.
And my slides, I linked to the landing page for the JupyterLab documentation. So Max has shared a handful of links. Most of them are specific sections of the JupyterLab documentation. But yeah, the JupyterLab documentation is pretty solid. Every once in a while, certain sections will slip out of date for short periods of time. But I've never seen a section stay out of date more than a few months, like never more than like a minor version release.
Yeah, there's also, and I think it's automatically updated with every release, if I'm remembering correctly. There's documentation of the API of like all of the different core extensions, and that can be really useful.
looking at Tim's comment real quick. So let's see. So to speak to the restarting, so when you are doing front end only, so front end extensions, those only require a refresh of the browser if you rebuild them. Only the server extensions require actually restarting JupyterLab. So if updates you're trying to do are front end only, they don't require access any updates to the API. You don't actually have to restart lab itself. So, and as I said, the new build system on 3.0 is going to add even more flexibility to that concept. And so if you go to the documentation and in the corner, you can switch the version from stable to latest. And there's all the new documentation on how the new build system works will be found in the latest version of the docs rather than the stable version. If you're interested in looking into that. As I said, it's very new. It's still just in RC, and I am still just starting to look at how that new build system works to update my own extensions. Yes, the user would have to refresh their browser, correct. There's no way around it.
The actual 3.0 is going to be released the week after JupyterCon.
Yeah, so about 2 weeks from now, you should see 3.0. So, but most instances like Jupyter Hub and stuff won't move to 3.0 right away because it will take some time for the third-party extensions and all the hosts and stuff to swap over. I think from 1.0 to 2.0, it ranged anywhere from like a week or two to a couple months, depending on the org hosting your Jupyter Hub instance. I know IBM took a few months, but some of the more open source groups only took like a week. Just depends on who your DevOps team in charge of your instances are and how fast they can turn around.
There's also a question about learning TypeScript. Rich, do you have experience with JavaScript? I think that was Rich who asked the question. Because TypeScript is really similar to JavaScript, but adding in types. I mean, I linked to the documentation. It takes a bit of getting used to, and I think a lot of the time, how I ended up learning it was like just the compiler complaining at me, and that was that is kind of the learning curve. I think like you're just going to make mistakes at the beginning, but it's a very like once you can get through all of the errors, and most of them are pretty easy to figure out as long as you understand like just the basic stuff about types. You can look that up in the documentation. You should be able to piece together like, oh, this is in practice how this is going to work. Oh, so it uses its own compiler, use TSC, and it transpiles, I think is what they call it, into JavaScript code. And then from there you use JupyterLab to, I mean, that will give you any errors that you're going to see. And then from there you want to like install it into JupyterLab as an extension, and you'll see the actual, if there are errors there, it'll be like in the console. Or I think Max had a bit about debugging there, but
recommendations in using Ajax or jQuery with the cookie cutters.
Either. Don't use either.
Don't use them? Okay. I've used jQuery in the past, but I have not touched jQuery since becoming a JupyterLab developer because
it should not be necessary with modern JavaScript and HTML. You can just use document query for it to do the similar things.
Yeah, the cutting edge JavaScript and especially just TypeScript in general makes jQuery kind of obsolete. No, I was a big jQuery guy before I moved into the Jupyter ecosystem and learned about TypeScript.
Yeah, and it's not very easy to like import jQuery into TypeScript. I think maybe kind of on purpose. It doesn't really.
Yeah,
It's
I
not,
think
like, set up for
whoever
that.
wrote
You can. There's like a way you can use it using like a CDN and Bower, but you definitely should not.
Yeah, it's like you'll run into some walls.
yeah, so it does take some getting used to. Changing from the jQuery, I guess, format to the more standard, latest, modern JavaScript, TypeScript format. But all the capabilities are still there.
Oh, and it looks like it's the end of the time.
Yes,
There's
it is.
5 people still on the call, but if anyone has any final questions, unless any of the panelists have to go. But otherwise, we can just wrap it up, I guess.
Looks like no other questions. Thanks for coming today, guys.
Yeah.
Sticking around till the end.
Yeah, to the 5 people here at the end. All right.
I think that's on Jim to stop the recording and close everything down.
Yeah.
Well, or we could just gracefully drop out.
I think we can all drop out.
See you guys.
See you guys later.
All right.
Thank
See ya.
you. Bye, guys.